The ways in which we do this now will create substance the ways by which we do that.
Hello and welcome to another Hydrogen Energy News interview. My name is Agnes Bilgradlia and my guest today is David Green, the CEO of CIC Hydrogen, firm dedicated to fostering the development and adoption of clean energy solutions, focusing on hydrogen projects. Under David's leadership, the company has played a key role in advancing several large-scale hydrogen initiatives. Now, let's explore his insights on this exciting sector's most promising opportunities and challenges. David, welcome.
Thank you, Agnes, and nice to be talking to you and your audience.
For the beginning, can you tell me who is David Green?
Yes, I guess the best short description is to say I've been working in the energy and water sectors, large infrastructure sectors for about 35 years, and in particular in recent times, very focused on the hydrogen sector, particularly the green hydrogen sector and the way in which it can play a role in decarbonisation.
What innovations in your modular units help you achieve $2 price per kilogram of hydrogen?
I think one of the first things to say in answering that question is Climate Impact Corporation, or CIC for short, is able to take a totally fresh look at the way in which we need to address these issues. We don't have assets that we need to protect, like big oil and gas companies. We don't have royalties that we need to protect, like many governments. So we were able to look at a clean sheet of paper when we started this journey some nearly 6 years ago now, and said, well, if we're going to achieve a $2 price point for the production of green hydrogen, then we needed to look at how we reduce those typical large-scale infrastructure risks that we many of us are familiar with, but also look to have the best solar radiation in the world available to the project. And as you know, 70 and sometimes more than 70% of the total production cost can be in the electricity use. So first step is to get to that excellent solar radiation. So we looked in many locations around the world. We happen to be Australian by nationality, so it was convenient for a project to start in Australia. But importantly, we started to design a really flexible way in which we could go about building projects of very large scale or smaller scale. And that's based around a 5 megawatt electrolyzer and all of the equipment necessary to support its operation in producing hydrogen. So that module stands alone, and it's quite unique in, as we're told by all of our advisors and many of the companies we talk to globally, it's quite unique in its approach. It's able to operate off-grid. It provides all its own renewable energy, completely sourced from the sun, provides its own water, so it doesn't impinge on local resources of communities. It doesn't add to the environmental damage that desalination can cause. And we have great flexibility in where we locate it. So we're doing that first in Australia, but it's also suitable for many locations around the world, the US, Middle East, Northern Africa, southern parts of Europe, and throughout Asia.
Just for the better understanding for the audience, how do your modules produce hydrogen without local or desalinated water?
Yes, and this is something we've worked with equipment manufacturers on for the last 2.5 years. So one of the critical aspects of green hydrogen is to be able to only source the power from renewable energy. Virtually no electricity grid worldwide is totally provided with renewable energy, even though some are getting close to that. The only way really to achieve that in many of the best solar radiation areas is to be off-grid. So we use solar panels to produce the electricity, which is sized to meet the energy demands of the electrolyzer. All the balance of plant, of course, is sized around that. And the other critical thing that we have done is to recognize that that many of the best solar radiation areas happen to coincide where deserts are. And it's intuitive when you think about it because of the intensity of the sun in those areas. But that creates the other issue, which needs to be addressed with strictly green hydrogen, is where do you access the water? And while the typical avenues are to say, well, we can access desal, or we can access a river or an aquifer, increasingly with climate change, those avenues are increasingly stressed. And so we set out to design a module which could operate by accessing moisture in much the same way as it rains. And that's through what's called an atmospheric water generator. But it's actually very common to all of us in that many of us have access to air conditioning. And what air conditioners do is extract the moisture from the air as part of that conditioning process, but the water is wasted. So it's actually a very mature technology, very common in use in many different ways. What we've done, though, is to apply that technology to capture the water rather than let it be wasted. And so it produces very pure water, which gives us a number of other advantages. And it can operate across very large ranges of relative humidity. So it can operate in deserts down to around 15% relative humidity. So it gives us enormous flexibility to locate in some excellent solar radiation locations, but without that limitation of accessing water or impinging on water being used for communities and agriculture and so on.
How does modular design improve scalability and flexibility in water-stressed areas?
Yeah, look, that's a very good question, and one we spent a lot of time on because there's a significant debate, I think, in the industry as it's looking to get the price down about whether large scale is better than smaller scale, and particularly when you think of things like electrolyzers. Our view, after doing a lot of work with equipment manufacturers, is if you think about what is often referred to as a 100 megawatt electrolyzer, in fact, it's actually a number of stacks added together. So smaller, what you might think of as electrolyzers with balance of plant. Now, there's some scale efficiencies you can get there, but the real scale efficiencies that are going to drive the price down are high volume manufacturing, and particularly moving what has been a cottage industry, frankly, the electrolyzer industry, into full automation. Then you get the significant benefits of automation, but also high volume. Just as we've seen those same effects drive solar and wind costs down, they're doing the same for electrolyzers. So one of the things that there's a couple of things we focused on very heavily. One is to drive the price down through manufacturing scale. Another is to drive the overall cost of production down through far greater efficiency in the use of electricity, because that's such a dominant driver of production of hydrogen. And I'll come back to talk about that in a bit more. But the part of what we have done in securing our supply chain is recognise that to really be able to deliver on projects which can have. So when we talk about a 5 megawatt module, we're still talking about something that, 7 or 8 hectares in scale. So they're not little in that scheme of things. But we then aggregate as many of those modules together to give us whatever scale we want. So it can stay at 100 megawatts, or it can go to 10, 20 gigawatts. There's no limit other than land and so on to how you can scale it up. And through scaling, by standardizing equipment, processes, operating protocols, securing the supply chain as we have, we're able to drive a lot of that efficiency. Another thing that we've done is work, as you would have seen in the announcement recently, in our partnership with GE Vernova, is recognise the excellent skills that they have in really focusing on the electrons and being as efficient as possible in the way in which we select equipment, we integrate it. But I can come back and talk about some of those issues a little bit further if you like.
What are the major risks and how do you mitigate them with the intermittent renewable energy?
And this is another objective we set out to address. So we recognise if you're going to produce green hydrogen at the scale required, so very large scale to meet the demand, there were a number of things that needed to be addressed. Typical risks. One was large-scale infrastructure risk and sinking huge amounts of capital into infrastructure before you could produce anything, plus all the other associated risks. Another one was intermittency of renewable energy. And many people are connecting to the grid to try to address that. But having had many, many years in grid design and regulation, I fully understand how grids don't solve those problems, and they're certainly not going to solve those problems for a long, long time with the transition to renewables connecting. So we set out, which is something that we're not the only ones, obviously, with this recognition, but we set out to work with equipment manufacturers to have their equipment designed for the use of it with intermittent energy. So electrolyzers that could load follow. Some people are recognizing that in the electrolyzer industry, but are saying, well, let's move to PEM because it's more suitable in that regard. Our view at this stage, which may change in the next year or so, is that second generation alkaline electrolyzers are probably going to be more economic. They'll load follow. They'll be able to do that without diminishing their life significantly. And so that's one example of where we have worked to get the benefit of equipment that can be designed for that purpose, which then means, for example, with our modules, we're DC coupling. And so we can avoid some of the typical equipment that you would need by doing that. But also, surprisingly to many people, we can operate the modules while the sun's shining, not overcapitalize on our solar and add batteries. So batteries can provide great services in many areas, but in a project like like ours are in fact a dead weight capital because they don't generate any income. So by having the equipment designed specifically to operate effectively while the sun's shining, very minimal need for any power overnight, and load following electrolyzers that have the capacity to start and go to full capacity within 30 seconds the next morning. We can reduce the amount of capital and operating costs really quite significantly.
What types of large-scale hydrogen projects are most promising?
Certainly our view and where we focused in our strategy is that to recognise that, and this was identified by the International Renewable Energy Agency about roughly 2 years ago, I think, when they did a multi-factor analysis of the best locations for producing green hydrogen. And so we're fairly familiar with those places like parts of the US, the Middle East and Australia and Chile, where there's very good solar radiation. What the International Renewable Energies Assessment also took into account is availability of water. And so as we look to move between now and 2050, the dynamics for a lot of regions change significantly in that the economics of trying to produce the water to get the scale in hydrogen, green hydrogen that is needed dissipates very quickly for a lot of those regions. And that's because they're limited. The economics of finding a solution for water to produce the hydrogen becomes a major issue. So what we've done is to recognize that to really produce the volumes of hydrogen that are needed globally, that we had to be able to find the way of accessing the best solar radiation. And that meant having an innovative solution to how we are able to provide water for the project. So we're able to go into some of the most extreme environments. We don't need access to grids. We don't need any town services or government services that are typically provided. We can scale according to, if we wanted to connect to a hydrogen pipeline like is running through into Spain and Portugal, we can connect directly in projects in the Middle East where they're a bit further inland but can still access transport. We can take advantage of that land that is marginal and can't be used for much else, but has excellent solar radiation. And so that opens up an avenue to tap into some of those best solar radiation sites, which would normally not be able to be accessed simply because the economics of providing the water solution would make them just improbable investments.
Can you walk us through a typical hydrogen project development cycle?
In our case, and this is another objective we set for the design, was once again recognizing, and there are different sectors within the hydrogen industry, of course. And when I talk hydrogen, I'm talking only green hydrogen. There's the mobility sector. There's sort of more localized need to provide hydrogen. What we're focused on is the very large projects for the hard to abate sectors of the economy, which means very large projects, very large volumes of production. So to achieve that, if you're doing a large scale project to 10, 20 gigawatts, that sort of scale, you can be looking at a development cycle which could be 7 to 10 years by the time you get into full production. What we've looked to do is by having a module which is is deployable into many locations without the need for a whole range of supporting infrastructure, and is largely standardized in design and suitable for a very large range of climatic conditions. We truncate that development cycle from 5 or 7 years down to about 18 to 12 months. So we can deploy very quickly. And because we have the supply chain secured through joint ventures with leading equipment manufacturers, that was critical to us being able to deploy. So what we're finalising at the moment with GE Vernova and Worley, who are our engineering and technical advisors, is fine-tuning that module. And the way I think of it is taking a normal sedan and turning it into a Ferrari. Just all that fine tuning to get all of the equipment as efficient in its operations, reducing the load on electricity demand, the operating protocols defined to give us maximum performance and lowest cost is critical. And the other criteria for us at the start was not to produce hydrogen. It's not hard to produce hydrogen. We know that. There's no magic. What we really have to do is produce hydrogen at that US $2 price point per kilo by 2030. And so that's another essential design criteria for us. So everything we do is driving towards that $2 price point, or $2 cost, I should say.
There's not a lot of competition in that space, I could tell you that.
No, but I'd have to say, and this is not just our view, but when we talk to the major off-takers, there is an awful lot of people out there who have gone about the process of producing hydrogen in the same way that they've tried to produce, industries have tried to produce in oil and gas, for example, doing the same old things. And it's just not going to work. It isn't going to work. And it's one of the reasons people like GE Vernova have aligned themselves with us, because they've looked at every project around the world and they can see that most projects are just doing same. And then because they can't achieve an effective cost of production, they then go to government and say, here, look, please help us. Well, that's not the approach we take. We're looking to produce a very large-scale project driven by the cost of production and a commercial return. Now, of course, if we can take advantage of government assistance, we'll always do that. But our objective is to achieve those commercial returns and that cost of production without the need for government assistance, because ultimately that's a regulatory risk. That sort of assistance can disappear at any time.
You mentioned partnerships and governmental support. Can you describe ideal partner for your projects? And also, how dependent are you on governmental support and the regulatory support?
So in terms of the way in which we see the whole supply chain, it starts, and we're very focused on lowest carbon intensity production of green hydrogen. So that means we need to be involved in the downstream or the equipment manufacturing. So we have joint ventures with some of the leading, so the world's second largest, this is public, second largest electrolyzer manufacturer in the world, first tier solar manufacturers, same with the atmospheric water generators. So that is very much a recognition that to be successful in managing your risk through the whole supply chain to the customer, you need to partner through that whole supply chain with organizations that have the capacity to manage risks and be an expert in their area. And so they, rather than looking to cannibalize each other through the whole supply chain, they work together to get an outcome that that drives to that ultimate objective. So our partners are, and this is another thing that we set out to do at the beginning to give us the flexibility to deploy globally. They're leaders in their field that have a recognition that they need to take an innovative approach to their own business and the equipment they design. Then with the midstream or the hydrogen production itself, we use the modular approach, which I've described. And then with the downstream, we've always targeted the hard to abate sectors, which use ammonia, e-methane, SAF, and some modifications of those. But then with our downstream strategy, it's to work with those partners that have a real need to solve a problem. So they may be large gas LNG buyers who have to change from the use of LNG to e-methane, for example. And so they're looking to find projects to work with who have the right type of approach. But some of them are also vertically integrated. So they bring with them the ability for manage the transport. And so once the transport, the handling through ports, the delivery to their own markets. So once again, we work closely with them in partnership, and these are equity partnerships. So we align interests effectively to be able to ensure that we get that delivery all the way through to what the customer needs into their market. And that's, whether it happens to be a LNG substitute, the ammonia for coal fire, co-firing in coal power stations, or for cracking in Europe back to hydrogen, or sustainable aviation fuel. The modular approach also gives us the ability to allocate part of the project to the production of those different derivatives. And so we have great flexibility in being able to satisfy the different demands of different off-takers rather than have to build a whole new plant. And once again, with the downstream, we've focused very much on those partners that have the rights, that they've recognised that the industry needs to change, the equipment they need to change, and the way in which they go about things needs to change. And so it's very much aligned with our thinking.
How does your investment strategy differ across regions, and how do you approach funding hydrogen projects?
Yeah, so CIC, or Climate Impact Corporation, a bit of a mouthful that bit, but we take an approach of working, and we traditionally have, and the forerunners to this corporation have traditionally worked with large institutions, utilities, many of them that would be sort of household names. And so we have strong relationships with those parties, and the way in which we've structured the financing. I've talked about the supply chain and the way in which we manage that, but in the way in which we finance the projects is through a structure of funds that we manage. So we seek to bring direct funding to the assets or the projects. But in the first instance, recognising that investors have different risk appetites and risk profiles, we have what we call a development fund, or a higher risk fund that helps manage the capital needs of the development phase up to construction. And then a large fund which has typical infrastructure type returns for the construction and operation of the project. So we split those two risk profiles to give investors an opportunity to allocate according to their risk profiles. But we also take investment directly into the asset. So it depends a little bit on the focus of those parties. But I think the separation of those risks and the way in which we've established those funds gives a good mix for investors around how they can be involved in projects like this.
How do you stay on top of innovation. And what's your long-term vision for climate impact corporation?
So we have, as part of the group, Climate Impact Corporation group of companies, we have Climate Impact Technology established in Singapore. I'm in Singapore at the moment, and that company is very much focused on innovation, working with those parties very early in the stage of developing new technologies, where we may invest in those and help them move through that commercialization cycle, but also to invest in some of the new intellectual property that we're developing with our partners, where that can be applied to new projects, either ours or others. So we're very conscious that through this probably the next 10 years, there's going to be a lot of new innovative ideas that are developed, new IP that will be developed. There'll be failures along the way as well, but we want to play a significant role in trying to identify those new innovative ideas that can then be encouraged through that whole commercialization cycle and into projects. I think your other question was what's the long-term vision? So we set out with some very clear objectives, which we're been very lucky to be executing, which really was to recognise that the globe needed to move very quickly to address decarbonisation. It had to provide very large volumes of green hydrogen. If we get comfortable about using blue hydrogen, we'll never get there. And so we wanted to demonstrate that we think there's we don't, our modules are not the answer to everything. They have a place in the overall solution. But a significant place, I believe. And so part of what our strategy is to rapidly deploy the modules with partners into those regions in the world. I've talked about big projects in those locations, but also the module is very suitable to regional communities that don't have access to energy security and water security. And so in a simple form, whether it's remote Australia, remote Africa, other countries, we could provide a module, attach it to a fuel cell, ammonia manufacture and fertilizer, and then for the first time, you've got a localized solution that provides you with energy security, water security, and food security. And it doesn't need supporting infrastructure. And so, that it has so many applications, and it is so flexible. And we set out and to do that, and we've been very lucky in that players, and we'll be announcing more shortly, but players like GE Vernova have seen that vision, and they see that as something they really want to be part of.
David, thank you for being my guest today. It was my pleasure.
Oh, it's a pleasure. Thank you very much for having me.